Can you hear us, Trustee Hammer?
Do you want that pushed toward you?
Yes, please.
It's a TV for them, not the board.
Right, and I just so I can see when Trustee Hammer wants to say something, otherwise I'm not gonna do it.
Oh, you may have to come from.
Is that better?
Well,
I think it maybe tilts us a little bit that way so that folks can move to the side of the room if they want to see what's on it. Yeah, that's, I think that's good.
We need a little rotator.
We need two screens.
I know, but then you decide.
I know. Or hologram. You work on that? Okay, all right, are we ready to get started, Dolores?
We're live.
We're ready, live. Okay. Evening, everybody, welcome. There we go. Thanks for joining us online, Trustee Hamrick. I know it's not ideal, so we really appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Okay, and if for some reason, if you want to speak and I'm not seeing you, just pipe up, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So welcome to our workshop tonight. It's going to be a little less than an hour. And the purpose of this workshop is to talk about noise. So if you'd like to comment on the content of what we're talking about, you feel free to stay for audience business when our regular meeting starts at 7. And audience business is one of the first items. So if you'd like to speak about it, you can speak about it at that time. Sound good? Okay. All right, so there was a lot in our workshop packet and really appreciate the completeness of this. So thank you, Cassidy. And I think maybe the thing to do would be, Cassidy, if you want to walk us briefly through the PowerPoint you put together. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And to the link in the email. Yep. And then I don't, oh, maybe you're over. Here we go. It should be post now, and now you can share your screen.
I can give a little background while they're
Yeah,
working on
I
that.
can start talking to, information. I can't, I don't know how she needs to share her screen view.
It's on Zoom.
It looks like
And
it's
you're
Zoom
on-
at the bottom. You're on Teams. Let's start with just a little background. So
That's
as,
great. Thank you.
oh, there she is. Never mind. We'll let her give it.
So just, this is a long slide. I know a lot of information, so I'm just gonna skim through it. I can see now, yes. So just why consider noise ordinances? Lyons is a town full of music. We know that. We also know that sometimes noise can be a stressor for some. And so there are both positives and negatives to the different types of noise. And we also know that noise covers everything from music to barking dogs and everything in between. So hopefully the word noise doesn't bring about negative or any sort of connotations. And this is also something that towns and municipalities can regulate. So I'll just start off, this is from the CML, qualitative versus quantitative. We currently have a qualitative noise ordinance based on all of the research I've done, which indicates that it's based on unreasonable, unusual, or unnecessary noise, not based on a decibel system. So quantitative is based on a decibel system or something that you can measure. Yet qualitative would be the responding officer may or may not be able to put that into words, it's just based on, what they're feeling. It's more flexible. So Lions, currently, I kind of mentioned, we have a qualitative noise. It's based on, unreasonableness from 25 feet from the distance of the sound. Some codes measure the distance from the sound, others measure a distance off of a property line or at a property line. So just kind of introducing other ways that municipalities will measure noise. Yeah, and then sometimes it's also based on a receiving district. I'm not saying that, not making any recommendations, but just saying that, especially in larger cities, if the noise is received by residential, commercial, industrial, it just makes the noise that's allowable a little bit different. So I just wanted to include some decibel charts just in case this is the way that the board decided to go. Different communities lay them out differently based on times, usually a daytime and a nighttime. They choose an acceptable decibel amount. So these are just a few examples, not gonna go into too many details about this. And then there is a Colorado statewide noise restriction, which is listed here, and there are currently some lawsuits involving municipalities that allow music to go over this. So that's just something to note. So a little bit more customization in some cities, municipalities. Sometimes they do a night versus daytime. That's pretty common. Some have weeknight versus weekend. So Telluride was a good example of that. The night limit is still the same. They just push it back 2 hours on nights they consider weekend nights, so Friday and Saturday. The same requirement. Yeah, or you can just do same all days of the week. Exemptions, so Lions currently has some exemptions from what's considered noise, including town sanctioned events. Some other things we wanted to just kind of note that Good Old Days is still listed in the code. We are hoping to work on something that will strike that from this section and the other section that it's listed in. So it is there twice, but we're hoping to remove that. Some municipalities include bells, snow removal, loading, unloading, town-owned events, town-sponsored events as exempt from noise. So that's just a consideration. And then other municipalities also have a very clear permitting process for when, some examples were certain venues in their municipality would apply for an annual, essentially exemption or an annual permit for enforcement. This is a challenging one, we know. What types of penalties exist? Who enforces it? If somebody emails me at 10 p.m. on a Saturday, I cannot respond. So potentially also some education on who is the proper source for what you're talking about, and then what can we do as staff, or what can the sheriff's department do, depending on how the code is written. I as staff right now might not have the power to enforce something that doesn't exist in the code. So one area of research that we were requested to look into more was NoiseNet. This was suggested by a resident, and we did contact them, and so they have, I listed their prices up above. They offer a service where they have a system, you can install it, and it measures noise, and it'll give you charts, graphs, information, all to whoever needed it, whether that's the town, the sheriff's office. They included in their information an example of one house in the city was having issues. They installed the system in their backyard and then tracked it for a month to see the progress. So that was just kind of an example of how their product was used. They did get back to me on the 30th. So I had some requests for more information. Essentially, they'll offer a discounted trial if we wanted it. And they talked a little bit more about the range and what the system would detect. We also talked, or just another way of measuring noise is the handheld meters. Type 2 and type 1 were the ones that we discussed. Type 2 are less expensive. Type 1 are used to calibrate type 2. And then these are the prices that I could pull offline. We would certainly want to look into that more if that was the route we were going, to get more accurate quotes and recommendations. And there's also just noted who would pay for these, if the sheriff's department, they don't currently have them in their cars, so would we be paying for them? And is that a cost we need to take on? And then Erin and I met with Michael from Grace Design to talk a little bit more about just noise and sound in general. And so first we just wanted to note there's a difference between decibel and then dBA. Most of the codes have the A at the end, which is just a weighted measurement for noise. And we talked a little bit more about if we were to put in a decibel-based system, how could venues measure that accurately or easily from their venue? Could they just measure from the 25 feet off their property line, determine that they're complying with the rules and feel good about pursuing or going through with the rest of the night? You know, how would that change versus if we just measure from different areas of complaint? And then he suggested just kind of like, if we wanted to pursue this, a meaningful experiment would be to have a venue owner or manager measure from the proper distance from their property line and then see how that noise is being measured out at different points in Lyons. So that was just kind of an experiment that was suggested, because then that venue manager could very accurately assess if they're meeting those requirements that were proven to be all right. And then, yeah, a little bit more information about the meters there. But I think we've already gone over that. And then after our survey results, I wanted to throw this in. This is just more information about highway noise because that came up a lot. And I also thought it was interesting to just kind of look at the decibels of it says a quiet neighborhood 45 to 55. And then conversational speech at 5 feet is 55 to 65 decibels. So just to kind of compare that to the charts, you'll see that we were standing outside measuring cars going by, and so even those can push what would be a quiet neighborhood above a threshold. And we did have concerns with highway noise and brake noise, so I wanted to throw those in as well. Just a few thoughts from the survey, which we can go over. Which we will probably go over, but how do we balance music venues with residents' concerns? Is there a good way we can do that? How can we better communication? And then traffic and brake noise. I know it's come up in Safe Streets for All, and it was suggested by a few residents, but would automated ticketing or enforcement slow down traffic, take down the noise? And then dog barking and enforcement came up as well in the survey. So just a few thoughts from that. And then I don't think we need to go into the current code, but if anyone wanted to review it, we've got a few slides. Noise kind of pops up in multiple sections. It's mostly in unreasonable noise, but then you'll see animals are separated out, braking, construction, and some other. So, and that there. If anyone has questions, or I can quickly tab through the survey results if that's wanted.
Anyone have any thank you, Cassidy. Anyone have any questions for Cassidy?
I do.
Go ahead.
So, in looking through the information on NoiseNet, is this a standalone device that's put in a static position that measures noise? We choose where to put it and it sits there for a month and gives us readings?
Yes, but you can move it. And so if we rented it for 3 months, you could station it in one spot for 2 weeks and then move it to another, but generally it's stationary while it's in that.
Is it directional? Does it indicate from where the sound is emanating, or is it?
Yeah, it comes back with a map that's got the whole circle around it, and so it has dots and for distance and measurements.
I have a question. So, according to your research, you said it would cost somewhere between $9,000 and $10,000 for an entire year of NoiseNet, but they do a 1-month trial for $660.
Yeah, so the trial is either free or $660, depending on, I shoved it at the end of one of the documents, but it depends on which level of reader you want. I think they recommended for us the middle one, which is maybe about $400 for the month. And it just depends on the precision of
So my question was, is it possible to have like a 3-month trial?
I can ask them. Yeah, their quote for me was just for a month.
Anyone else?
Thank you for the thoroughness of that. Really helpful.
Sorry, I know it was a lot, but I was just trying to give it, put it all in there and then hopefully distill it down.
Well, we asked you for a lot. So appreciate it. And really appreciate the survey results. The way that those were presented was really easy to comprehend. So, appreciate that too. And so tonight, I think what we want to discuss is whether we want to change our current noise ordinance. What other, propositions do board members or staff have to try to mitigate the conflict between folks who think there's too much noise and folks who do not. So Trustee Browning, I know you had some suggestions, and I wonder if we'd like to talk about them now.
Yeah, let me throw out a couple points about our existing ordinance and then a suggestion of a possible process based on another ordinance we've got.
Okay,
A couple of things about our existing ordinance that I think a lot of citizens don't understand, and I've even talked to a couple of music venue owners, and they didn't understand. While it's true to an extent that we have a qualitative reasonableness standard, that standard in the code is immediately followed with a provision that's quoted in the handout somewhere that says, yes, reasonableness is the standard, but any amplified sound, and it doesn't even specify between outdoor and indoor sound for that matter, audible more than 25 feet from the source of the sound is deemed unreasonable. So we start with a qualitative thing and we quickly go to a quantitative thing that if you think about any speaker, which amplified music is played through, that's, if you can't hear it at 25 feet, something's wrong. So essentially that basically deems unreasonable most outdoor and indoor, for that matter, amplified music in Lions. And that leads to enforcement issues of, okay, do we enforce it by the letter of the law here, which came up several years ago in the Lions Den situation. And I think there's another common misunderstanding or misperception that our noise ordinance has something to do with day and time limits. If there's a 9 p.m. cutoff or 10 p.m. cutoff on weekends or something, our noise ordinance is absolutely silent about that. So if we're talking about loosening the 25-foot rule that's in there now, and in that sense, making the noise ordinance a little more liberal, we're probably also going to be talking about putting in day and time restrictions that are pretty common in our places. And in that sense, we would make the noise ordinance that exists now more restrictive. So we're kind of adjusting it both ways. The only date time restrictions that I know about that exist are, I don't know, 5 years ago or so, we redid what were 3 downtown, what they would call outdoor activity overlay districts. And there was a pretty open one, a restrictive one, and a limited one. We cut that down to 2, but what resulted from that was really the only part of town where there's a restriction on days and hours in which you can play outdoor music is the block that at the time the Stone Cup was on, because there were residents living in the Stone Cup owners at the time, Sam and Mindy. We tried to work with them and the residents and find something that would work for both parties, and I think we mostly did. But it only applies to that one block. It doesn't apply to the other music venues in town. It doesn't apply to Planet Bluegrass or Riverbend or Main Stage or Rock Garden or what used to be Diner Bar, which may or may not ever be a music venue again. I don't know. So keep in mind those 2 things. There are no daytime restrictions, and there is a very quantitative aspect to our noise ordinance, which is if you can hear sound from the speaker more than 25 feet, it's deemed unreasonable. It's a pretty tough standard. The process thing I wanted to throw out as an idea or suggestion comes from our ordinance on short-term vacation rentals. When we were going through that ordinance, one of the things that we heard from citizens and that was echoed in other towns a lot too is, what do you do about party houses where, you know, they're rented to out-of-town guests and they have a big outdoor party and they're disturbing the neighbors and everything. And one aspect of that, that we added to the ordinance and it's still there is if you're gonna have a short-term vacation rental license in Lyons, you have to provide a 24-hour phone number where if there's a complaint about noise at your property, somebody is there to respond to it. And that's something I've heard back from citizens a little bit about the music venues. Who do I call? And then gone to a couple of websites of the music venues. There's no number there and everything. So I want to throw that out there as a suggestion of, in exchange for, as part of the process of making it a new rule that would be more reasonable from the venues, from the venue owner's perspective than what we've got now, that they in turn make themselves available if there are complaints. And I would hope that that would be the first line of communication if something goes wrong, that somebody would call the venue owner. And I think we all pretty much know most of our current live music venue owners, and I'm confident, and a couple of them are here, I think, that they will respond reasonably to citizen complaints. It's too loud tonight. Why do you have so loud drums? Because it's happened already. I know I've talked to a couple of venue owners and they've gotten calls or emails eventually. And I think that's the way to do it. We also had a process we went through when there were all the problems with the Lions Den, that when the neighbors and the venue couldn't work things out, staff tried to mediate. That's kind of the second level. Okay, if you can't work it out among yourselves, then let's try a staff mediation to try to see if we can find some compromise position. So that would be a second level. And I would hope that we would not get to the third level of having to take an official decibel reading on a meter and either send out a code enforcement officer or the sheriff's officer to do a formal citation and complaint, because that would only be kind of a last resort. And I'm pretty confident in our venue owners and our citizens too, that if they can talk things out, that most of the time they'll be able to accommodate each other. So I would throw that out there as kind of a process suggestion, because the enforcement process, it is difficult. And one of the clear answers to one of the survey questions was, should we spend a lot of money on enforcing a noise ordinance? And the clear, overwhelming response was no, that's not a priority. So before we go to $10,000 a year or more for noise net, let's think about some process that doesn't result in, okay, somebody called, we're gonna send a sheriff deputy out. Let's see if we can figure out a way that we can handle this locally as reasonable people, which I think our venue owners and our citizens are.
Thank you. Did you have something?
Yes, I am looking at all the information. I do not believe that switching to a quantitative from a qualitative is in our best interest. I do believe making some changes at 25 feet from the source, as Trustee Browning says, is kind of ridiculous. I think it needs to be from the property line. And I'm not sure it's 25, I think it might be 50 feet from the property line. And I don't think you can take the human element out of this. I mean, just the direction the wind blows determines whether in Stone Canyon I hear that bluegrass or not. And so, you know, a reading taken in 1 hour may not be the same 5 minutes later. I also don't want to see us spending $9,000 a year on something that, from those who answered the survey, the majority of our citizens by far are not interested in us spending money on. So I think that changes to the code that makes the distance reasonable. One thing I think we ought to be doing is enforcing it. And I think that probably needs to go through a code enforcement officer. And I believe that there needs to be, you know, I think most people, when someone from a civic authority reaches out and says, hey, there's a problem here, most people want to ameliorate that problem or eradicate it completely. You know, there are not a whole lot of folks out there, or certainly in town, who are just gonna, you know, thumb their nose up at you. But I do believe coming from someone in a position of authority is better. But of course, the difficulty with that is, you know, a code enforcement officer doesn't work 24/7. So, you know, in my neighborhood, it's dogs barking at 3 in the morning. That's the biggest problem. So that doesn't necessarily help us a lot. So yeah, I believe that, making those changes, to the town code are important. There's one other that I did not make a note. It'll come back to me. It was another thing trustee Browning said.
Okay, we'll kick me for things down.
Yeah.
Okay. Trustee Lowe?
Yeah, the enforcement aspect is the kicker, right? Because this lady is not on duty at the times when most of those violations would occur. So I guess I would ask Sergeant Sears what is his department's take on enforcing noise ordinance or answering to noise ordinance complaints from citizens. You don't have a dB meter to measure, so it's, to you, it's definitely qualitative.
Subjective.
Then, I just ran through, so last year we had 24 noise complaints. Most of those were May, June, and July, but 2023 we had 20. And then 2022 we had 17. So for us, our department does have a few decibel readers. I think Superior, because it's part of their code. It's part of a decibel level, and same with the county code. So we have I know we have one, if I needed one at our headquarters in Boulder. In my 16 years, I've never even used one. Anytime we go to like a noise complaint, usually it's, people too loud of music and like, hey, you guys need to turn it down a little bit. We're getting some complaints. If we come back here, then you'll probably get a ticket, and 9 times out of 10 that works. And so, and even the complaints in town is like, is it, 11 in the afternoon and someone's running a table saw because they're remodeling their house, or, versus, oh, it's 3 in the morning and someone's using heavy equipment or tools or loud music, then, but 9 times out of 10, it's just talking to them and that solves the problem. And looking over the survey and also the noise complaints we've had in the last few years, like, it's not a huge, and I know there's people in the town that don't necessarily call the sheriff's office about a noise complaint, they'll just email the town or put something on Facebook, which, I get, but if you want us to take care of it, you need to call us.
Thank you. Trustee Dodd?
Yeah, I appreciate your response. I really appreciate what trustee Browning was saying about the human factor. I think a lot of it is, having that discussion, having a number to call. I don't know that our code compliance officer is going to be here on the weekends and the evenings, so I feel like it does fall on the sheriff's office, who we have a contract with. And I just feel like, I trust your judgment when it comes to unreasonable.
Right.
I feel like this is part of your profession. This is part of your mandate.
Yeah, and it's, I appreciate that, and it's, it's a quality of life issue, right? So, and that's something I want to improve. So if you're dealing with an issue, if you're emailing the town about it, then it qualifies to call our dispatch and report it. That way a deputy can get, and we can have the stats to back up when there's, if we had 115 noise complaints, in 6 months, well, that's an issue, I would, imagine, but, like I keep saying, just please call us for stuff, because that's what we're here for, and, and if it's a neighbor issue, like I can't think of one off the top of my head, but if it's, a neighbor issue, civil complaint between one neighbor and the other about like, oh, they're shining their light in my house, or like noise, they always turn the music up, they know I sleep during the day, and it's documented, then that's something, okay, it's like, we've given you X amount of warnings about this, that your neighbor's sleeping, and you have your music blasted up where I can hear it, from down the block, and then they're gonna get a ticket. But 9 times out of 10, it's just people having a good time, or it's music, or, so you can't please everybody, unfortunately, so.
Yeah, I do think we should put something in the code on the time of day.
Mhm.
That's the other piece that I mentioned.
Trustee Hamrick, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think the current municipal code is ridiculous in my opinion. I mean, any noise past 25 feet, I realize there's a reasonable aspect to it, but anyway, so to me, it seems like if we're going to have anything that's enforceable, it has to be measurable, and hence we do need to have some level of decibels. readings and I agree with Trustee Browning. I mean, I think that's the last resort that you want to get to. You want to take the other steps of notifying venue owners and put them on the hook to fix it. Because like Sergeant Sears just said, most of the time he goes and addresses those and things improve. So I think, but at last resort, I think decibel readings would be appropriate. And I bought one of those tools, type two, I think, off of Amazon for $30 just for granted. So they're not that expensive. I would add though, and this is kind of a different tactic here. When we were going through the Riverbend noise discussion, the owner brought up many times about a level playing field. And right now, and I remember at the time, staff provided all the contractual language and the different documents of what Planet Bluegrass, the rules they had to play by versus, a main stage versus a farmette. And there's no standardization across the board. So I think as we go through this, we need to take a look at that. I saw the letter from the owner of Main Stage today. And so I think engaging business owners and just coming up with something that's a level playing field, like Chris Lee said a number of times, just so we're treating everybody the same. And then one thing that hadn't really been discussed, Cassidy brought up, but really the sound, the music was not a big issue identified in the survey. But the biggest issue, bar none, was traffic noise. So I think certainly trying to do something there. So I was kind of interested in hearing about automated traffic noise or a way to capture that. Because if somebody's coming in town with a Jake brake on and they're gone by the time anything can happen. So I think coming up, if there's some creative technologies that will allow us to address that, that would go a long way in my opinion. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Trustee Hammer. And I agree with everybody. I think, I think about, Mark, what you were suggesting in terms of, access for neighbors to business owners. I think of it kind of like a good neighbor agreement. And there are plenty of those to look at. And, I absolutely agree with Eric Keene that, no matter what we do, we should reach out to the owners of the businesses to get their feedback and maybe come up with some kind of collaborative program, I'm not sure what that would look like. I'm sure there are some suggestions. Even if it's, if you're gonna have live music, you'd have to display a phone number that someone can call. I don't know. But I do agree that given the opportunity, these issues can be resolved just by talking to each other. I certainly don't want to hamstring our local businesses, don't want to hamstring the music, and also want to help preserve people's quality of life. And I think we can probably find a way to do that. We're a smart community. I do want to talk about the traffic noise because I found it so interesting. One of the things I found so interesting in that survey was that people talked about the traffic noise so much. And so I wonder, we're doing that CDOT speed study. Can we talk to CDOT about any kind of mitigation measures that they know about for noise? I mean, maybe I think you suggested maybe there's a different substance they can put down on the roads on top of the asphalt, for example. So that's one thing, like speed, just general traffic noise through town is one thing. The Jake brakes and the people with just purposefully really loud cars. That's another thing that I don't know how to manage. And Cody, maybe you have an idea, or maybe there is some technology that we don't know about that could, automatically send someone a ticket if they use their Jake brake in town.
That'd be nice. No, and that's something I need to look into because there's really I don't know, we're not like experts when it comes to you see State Patrol, they have their experts and they do vehicle inspections or the semi inspections and weigh them and do all that stuff. We're not, and we don't have anything to, if you're gonna give someone a ticket, you gotta have something to measure, or like a speeding ticket, you have a certified instrument that measures speed. You know, and that's what we give them a ticket. You can't just be like, oh yeah, you look like you were going this fast, you know, and, but the Jake breaks, there are signs posted at all entrances of the town that, you know, and the majority of the truckers know that, right? And pretty much any town you go to, if you just look, you'll see a sign, right? And they know that, right? And yes, it happens, of course, but you know, you know, 50 Harleys that come through town and drive up to Estes that's gonna be loud. And I've never seen anything where you can stop them and be like, oh yeah, you guys are being too loud, here's your ticket, you know, I've never seen anything like that, so.
Yeah.
But those, you know, like noise net, you know, just, I think if you're gonna invest in something, just see, you know, what they can do, right? That way, if we do come up with something or add into our traffic code or whatever it might be is gives us, you know, times and locations of where this is happening the most, because if we're just, you know, our deputies are pretty much going call to call and, you know, we run traffic when we can and, you know, that's I think more of a issue, safety concern, right? Versus noise, spending money on noise versus, you know, speed, and because, you know, people, you could sit in town all day and write tickets for people 15 and over all day long. It's just having the time and resources to do that, you know, so. But yeah, it'd be nice to get something where you can, you know, iron down the exact times locations where we have the biggest problem.
Can I ask you a question, Cody?
Yeah.
So of the 24 noise complaints in 2024, like, you don't have to give exact numbers, but approximately what percentage do you feel like we're able to be resolved just by kind of having conversation versus writing a ticket?
All of them.
Okay,
I'm not aware of any tickets written. I could double check on the stats, but of any noise ordinance violations. We've come close and, there was an issue at a house and it was like a tenant issue and they were playing loud music purposely and they almost got a ticket, but like I said, I've never written a noise ticket in my whole time of being a cop.
I guess to be complete on that, we should note for the record that it did get to the whole ticket citation and even go to court process with Lions Den. And
That was the last time
they
I
actually went to municipal court and the municipal judge here ruled that Lions ordinance was not unconstitutional for vagueness, which there's varying cases, but that's just a local, you know, trial level court. So it has gone to that process, and for what it's worth, our local municipal judge said, yeah, I think we can enforce that under a reasonable standard. So it has gotten there before, but I also need to say, I said, I'm confident in the current venue owners. We had and the owners, I mean, clear, it wasn't the owners, it was the tenant there. There was a problem with the tenant there, and the compliance with the noise ordinance was among the least of the problems with that. So, but I responded to the other people.
sure, please.
As to Trustee Williams' point, Mayor Pro Tem Williams' point about not using decibels, the problem is, even if you change the measurement to something like 100 feet from the property line, or the location where you're assessing the sound, what are you measuring? And as you have different people, a code officer, an older sheriff's deputy who doesn't like rock music, or some young guy that in his off hours hangs out at, you know, music places, that person goes to 100 feet from the property line. I think that's reasonable. I think that's unreasonable. And the consistency just isn't there without some type of an objective standard, at least that's my view. And I also want to mention one question in the survey or the responses, and I think there's a general response that how important is it for the town to have and enforce a noise ordinance? And the majority of responses is not that important, but a lot of times those questions depend on the responses depend on the question. If that question had been phrased in terms of how important is it to the town of Lyons to have economically viable music venues, and would it be important if 2 or 3 of those went out of business? I think you get way different responses to that question, and that's really what we're talking about here. And it's not just a Lyons business, but most of these businesses, particularly the wedding venues, but also Main Stage and also Rock Garden, they bring in a lot of people from out of town. it's not just the locals there. Depending on the band and stuff, you may have a mostly local crowd, but a lot of times there's significant people who come from out of town and spend their money in Lions, which is what we've been trying to figure out how to get people to do for years and years and years. And so, yeah, I get that just how big a problem is noise generally. Most people would say it's not the top of our list, but how important is the economic viability of music and restaurants and stuff, and music venues and restaurants in line, it's pretty important, especially to the people that own them. Couple of other things too, I should also mention that in terms of level playing field, yeah, I'm not fond of trying to split a 1.4 square mile town with a lot of the 1.4 square mile being parks and open space into zones. We don't even have an industrial zone. We've got 2 industrial lots in different pieces of town. So that kind of stuff in big cities makes sense, but I don't think it makes sense for Lions. But in terms of level playing field, remember a couple of things. There are a couple of existing agreements with particular venues that we would probably need to grandfather into any orders we did. And we've negotiated at great length our arrangements with Planet Bluegrass. And I think for their festivals, am I right that there was an 11 o'clock maximum cutoff time? I'd have to go back and look. I think it may be 11 p.m.
11 or 11:30.
And there's a limited number of events. I'd have to go back and look. Maybe 10:30. I'll have to go back and look. And then as part of the Riverbend PUD process here earlier this year, Riverbend voluntarily agreed to an 8 o'clock cutoff time for outdoor amplified music. And so when we go to a level playing field, I think we need to respect those agreements that we, the town, have reached. And in part, those agreements were reached because there was citizen input on both of those. And just one more comment on the traffic and dogs and construction noise. We have ordinances on those, and it wasn't those ordinances that gave rise to this effort to relook at our noise ordinance. It was the amplified music venue issue. Those questions, as somebody else said, are really just enforcement questions. How much do you want to spend on paying sheriff's deputies to sit out and wait for somebody to use a Jake brake? Or how many, it kind of relates to the speed issues, which we're working on that survey, and how much speed enforcement do, because if you slow them down, the noise is going to decrease to some extent, and that kind of thing. So those are really enforcement issues, and to some extent, I think publicity issues. I wonder how many people knew, and I didn't know until I read it getting ready for this meeting, about the 2 households rules for barking dogs. If you and your neighbor both get together and file a written complaint with the town that says this dog's out there barking at 3 o'clock in the morning every night, that gives the town an enforcement. If there's 2 cumulative complaints, it's deemed to be unreasonable. It's kind of like, can you hear the noise from 25 feet? If you get 2 complaints from 2 separate households about the same barking dog, whoever's doing that has got a trouble defending it. So maybe we should publicize that. Hey, if you got barking dog complaints, here's a form complaining. If 2 of them complain, then it's me. So again, while those things are important, the traffic, the construction, although we don't have that much construction in lines these days, and barking dogs, that wasn't the point of going through this relooking at the noise ordinance.
Yeah.
We may decide we want to revise those to some extent or change how we enforce them, but those have been on the books a long time. And there wasn't any push to really go in and revise those that I heard.
No, but I think, more information about what our residents care about is always good. And so I'm glad to know that so many people find traffic noise to be problematic, because that means we can focus on helping fix that to the extent that we can. I'm curious about, there were some other municipalities that, they have their cutoff time, let's say 10 p.m. But venues are allowed to ask for exemptions a certain number of times per year, which would be granted administratively. And so I'll be curious, and maybe this is something we can talk about when we get to this part of the agenda, whether that's kind of a program we want to talk about doing. And maybe it's only from June through August that we do that. But I think, to the extent that we can provide the venue some flexibility and residents some assurance that it's not gonna go till 10:30, 11 o'clock all night long. Not that all summer long, not that anybody's doing that now. But, just so that kind of everybody knows what to expect, I think that would be helpful. Attorney Dittman?
Yeah, I just want to chime in here mostly for the part of the public, just to let them know that this particular item about whether we can grant permits that exceed noise limitations either set by us or the state is the subject of 3 different Supreme Court cases right now, as we've talked about. So that's something we just want to monitor moving forward about, what our authorities want to grant those type of permits, but more generally to regulate noise. But I just wanted to highlight that issue specifically because it is how each of those lawsuits kind of came about.
Mhm. And what towns are those? Can you remind us?
Yeah, so it's Salida, which is a client of our law firm, and an attorney in my law firm is representing in that Supreme Court case. Chaffee County, the county generally, and then Colorado Springs are the 3 different jurisdictions which are part of those lawsuits.
And in Colorado Springs, it's because of their new great big venue, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Trustee Hamrick, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nope.
Okay. Victoria, is there anything staff would like to add for us to think about?
I can just touch on a couple of points.
Yeah, great.
One suggestion or maybe multiple that came in from residents was just in terms of having businesses work together. They were complaining more that multiple venues were playing music at the same time. So that could be part of the collaborative or whatever comes out of this meeting, maybe just working together to coordinate outdoor noise. And then to the point of automated enforcement, I think maybe more with speeds. Traffic and speed, that's come up too in the Safe Streets for All. So if somehow this can go with that, and we can just at least tackle the speeding cars, I think that's something to consider. And I think that'll be it for now. Yeah, the outdoor permitting, I think there are some examples of how communities do it, but yeah, that's why the state limits are in there, was because that might be something we want to be careful about. But could also be a way to get information from music venues just for that contact if you want to do something where residents need to chat with the contact from the venue. That could be a way to do it. Yeah.
And on your question about should there be exemption, a limited number of exemptions for special events, I would point out that the existing overlay district thing for the Stone Cup area allows 4 requests per year for going beyond their normal hours. And that was done because the Stone Cup like to have special things during the festivals. And other venues might want to do that. Their normal cutoff time might be 10 o'clock if that's what we decide on or whatever, but if bluegrass is going till 11, why shouldn't they go to 11 too? So there is an example of that in our code right now that they can request for special events. I don't know if they ever did.
I get an occasional request from Main Stage, just like once a year, maybe twice, to see if they can go just a little longer, but.
But that doesn't apply to them. They're not even in that area.
I know, they ask.
Yeah.
It's good, nice to ask, but.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else?
Just one thing on,
Yeah.
if you were trying to tip it based on noise, probably would be about as easy to do that as it has been to ticket coal miners. And I believe since that law was enacted here in the state, I believe there are fewer than 30 times the person's been ticketed for puffing diesel fuel from their truck. So, it's just trying to do something to a moving vehicle is
Yeah.
difficult. You gotta see
Well,
it right when you're there.
And we've been talking, I think, for a while, off and on about automated traffic systems, automated speed systems, can we get, can we borrow one of the speed vans from the city of Boulder? Can we, what can we do to slow down the traffic? So, maybe those are more, maybe we have to have those conversations a little bit more in depth and find out really what's available to us, what it would cost, what the benefits would be. We don't want to put your deputies out of a job, Sergeant.
Oh, with the traffic in this town, that'll never happen.
We had determined, we had this discussion earlier last year, but that we could not have speed cameras or red light cameras on any of our CDOT roads, is that correct? Or was the cost prohibitive?
I think it was more cost prohibitive, but we have already, when we meet with CDOT, we've already asked a few of these questions, you know, can we get the flashing speed sign that says how fast you're going? Can we look at a red camera? Like, you know, a camera that takes picture. We had a whole list going for them.
Yeah,
So-
and to,
We'll keep working on those if
and
that's.
you just need to get a permit, just like we did for flock, if cameras and put them on their right of ways.
Mhm. Okay. Well, we'll talk about that in a future agenda, maybe more in depth. See what we can put together.
Or when we do discussion direction, we can.
Yeah.
If there's specific things you want us to ask about, we sure can.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening to the workshop. Like I said, if you want to comment, you can do so at audience business just after 7 o'clock. We are gonna end the workshop and then this is it's a little bit unusual, but, we're gonna open our meeting and then likely go right into an executive session. And so we're gonna have to clear the room for that. We will start the bulk of the regular meeting, with, the reflective moment of silence and agenda approval and then audience business at 7 o'clock. So, we're gonna have to ask, we're gonna take a little break. We're gonna ask for the room to be cleared except for executive session participants. And then we will welcome you back before 7 o'clock. Sound good? So you can go to one of our wonderful venues.
Everybody head over to main stage.
Get a beer. Yeah, go get a beer at Main Stage. Go get a beer at the Rock Garden.
Close.
Oh,
Sandwich at the market.
Go get a sandwich at the market.
Yeah.
Guy makes it really good.
Comment on Zoom?
No, not anymore. It has to be in person. Sorry, it's a.
I'm gonna end this one now, Brandon, and I'll send